Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's old Coach. And we are writing a book called What a Difference a Day Makes. And there's 10 chapters in this book. And guess what this is? Chapter number 10. What happened to me right after God spoke to me and said, that's for your next life. And he's talking about how awesome it is to be born again and go to heaven. But right after that happened to me, I was at my driving range. It wasn't just a few days, so I got a call from a friend of mine, a professional lady golfer, down in Central Florida at a place called The Villages. And she said she knew all about my golf business and all that stuff, and we'd played golf together several times. And she had played in the U.S. Open in the women's part of that, so she's a golfer. She said, you've got to come down here and see this place. So I said, all right, I'm coming to look. So I visited that little old place up in Dalton, Georgia. So I go down there and meet with her and talk, and it's beautiful. And I'm sitting here in my honest to goodness thinking that we could reload Kiss Golf. And in hindsight, you can never reload anything. It is what it is, what's next. But we sat there and built a beautiful driving range and training academy and absolutely did custom clubs. But it just never clicked like Kiss Golf did. But it was good. It was all that stuff. But in the middle of this, and about the middle of year 3, and I just loved it down there. It was just golf mega. But I was working 10, 12 hours a day, 7 days a week. But it wouldn't work. It's golf. But giving lessons and all that stuff and enjoying it. But I went into work one Monday morning, and all of a sudden I just had no energy. My chest was hurting. So one of my guys took me to the hospital, and my heart was out of rhythm, and I mean, it was bad. I was just drained. And so they did all the stuff with me and all these tests and things. But when the bottom line was done, I was totally dehydrated. And I'd been that way for years, and didn't know it. I just was never thirsty, so I didn't drink. But in 100-degree weather, you better drink. And so that's what I learned. I'm totally dehydrated. So I got fluids and stuff and keep going, but my energy level, instead of going up, just kept getting worse and worse. And I got to the point where I'm going to die. And I really felt that way. And it wasn't a panic about it, but I'm just going to die. And so I finally decided, well, I can't do justice to the driving range and the students. So I just turned that over to one of my pros down there. And I'm going back to North Georgia. And if I die, that's where I'll die. I got no energy, none. So I just left all my stuff. I just packed my personal belongings in my car, and I'm headed to L.J., Georgia, to where my mom's house was. She is out of it already, but anyway, it was just an old double-wide mobile home. But anyway, that's where I could go and rest. So I don't know how I got there. I really don't. I was that absolute weak. And I would drive up that highway, and I said, Lord, if I live, if I stay alive, do me a favor. Let me find some little old cabin up in the mountains there in North Georgia, where I was born and raised, and let me ride or whatever till I die. And I'll be tickled to death. And just the footnote right here, because it's going to matter in a few minutes in this story. But I wasn't somebody that was chasing. I had give 4 good attempts at marriage, 3 at that, and none of them worked. So I wasn't in that mode. But Lord, if there is any woman out there that you would like me to pursue, you let me know by her eyes. That's all I said. But I meant it, and he knew I meant it. So on with the story. So I drive back from Central Florida up to LJ, and honestly, I don't know how I got there. I really don't. And Mother had a stepdaughter who was an angel. Took care of Mom there, lived just up the street from her. Now, Mom finally got so bad with her back and things that nobody could care for her, so we took her up to Nashville where Frank was, to a nursing facility. But the daughter-in-law lived right there close by and just loved all of us, and we loved her. She was awesome. But when I pulled in Mom's old trailer or mobile home, I didn't realize, but the family had been in there and taken just about everything out. Anything anybody wanted, they'd taken out of it. So it really looked bad. And there were still 2 beds in there, and the kitchen stuff, enough to cook and that kind of thing, but it just wasn't Mom's. But I went in there and made shift to bed enough to go to bed, and slept, got up the next morning or after, whatever it was, but absolutely so weak I could hardly walk. And my best friend for years was always just my best friend. And as soon as I got there, he come by to see me, and he saw what condition I was in. He didn't say anything, but I was at death's door. And he went and got food for me, that kind of stuff. And him and his wife, good grief, they were just so special and are. Well, he's gone, but she's there. And but there's nothing like a best friend. And no matter what the situation, they're your best friend. And one little quick footnote about this best friend. When I bankrupt 4 years before this, or 5, everybody in my world pulled an exit. Get gone. Because all the money I had, I didn't have anymore, so they would, a whole different deal. And out of all of that, there was 2 people that was coming in the door when everybody else was leaving. One of them was Jimbo Golden, that's my best friend, and the other was my baby brother Steve. And they were like glue. With their heart. They loved me. They were there to help. Now, I had a couple of other long-distance friends that were on the phone and mean it, but those 2 were there to do whatever they could do. And so I went through, I don't know, maybe a month of just trying to get out of bed every morning. Now, for that month, I went to bed with my clothes on. In case I died during the night, it wouldn't embarrass Eugene to come in the morning and call an ambulance or call a coroner or whatever, because I felt like every day, I'm going to die today. And not maybe, it wasn't a poor little me, it was, I'm dying. So that month went by, and I finally could get up and go in the car and go down to the river at LJ and walk 100 yards. And then a week later, I could walk 200 yards. But it was that bad. And so I was decided there's nothing just to stay here. So I'm going to go to Nashville with my daughter and just be a burden on her. Oh, it was sad, but anyway, I knew I was welcome there to go do that. So I was planning that trip, and I spent several months, several years prior, doing ads for my buddy up at North Georgia Ford. It's Tim Ford. And I'd write his commercials, and I enjoyed it. I loved him. He's a hoot. But anyway, I was coming down the highway up there one afternoon, and my phone rang, and it was Tim. He said, "Won't you stop by and see me?" So I wasn't 2 miles from him, hadn't been there and I don't know when. But I stopped. He said, "Won't you come in and train my guys? They need help. They need attitude. The building does. Needs some smiles in here. And you know how to do that." I said, "Well, Tim, I might be good for 2 hours a day. It's just that bad." And I didn't look it, I don't think. I don't know. But anyway, he said, "That's fine. Whatever you do." So I started going up there just a couple hours a day, and I'd do the sales meeting of the morning. And then I'd do greetings when somebody would come in for service or come in to see a car. Greet them and turn them over to a salesperson, whatever. Anything I could do was just killing time, not killing it, and Tim was absolutely gracious to let me do that. It was huge. And so I was one morning, just like I did every day, I just walked through the building and greet people. And I walked into the service department, and I met a lot of people that I went to high school with and stuff like that in that building over the days. And it was encouraging to me just, to see them and greet them. But I walked in, and I just looked around in that waiting area, people waiting for the car to get ready, and there was 4 or 5 or 6 little black chairs, a whole lot like this chair I'm sitting in, around that room. And as I looked around, there was one of the little black chairs over here in the corner, and there's a woman sitting in there, looked like she's studying her Bible. That was just a glance to see that. So I walked by, and in a few minutes I walked back by, and I said, "Good morning," to her. And she looked up at me, and when she did, don't know why, God said, "That's the eyes. That's what you asked for. There it is." And I looked back down, she had on a ring. I thought, that dog ain't going to hunt. So I just walked on by. And but I knew them eyes said something. And so I come back by there in a few minutes, and I said, "What you studying?" And she told me what we just did, and I was just being friendly. And I said, "What does your husband do?" She said, "I'm married to him," and pointed straight up. Well, if God's all I got to compete with, I can get that done. Little humor. But I just knew there was something very special about this. So I went back by and came back with a yellow pad in my hand, and I didn't realize how important that was going to be later. But I said, "I'd like to take you to dinner sometime. If you'll give me your name and phone number, I'll call you." And she took the pad and wrote it down, handed it back to me. So that's about all that day consisted of. But that night I called her. And there's 2 sides of this story, back and forth. But anyway, we talked and talked. And I was going to take her to lunch Saturday up in Blairsville. So I went up after work and took her to lunch and learned a lot about her. And then the very next day, we were going to go to church in Blairsville together. And she wouldn't tell me where she lived. Now, I didn't know this at the time, but this lady had been single for 32 years. Never had a date in 32 years. Of course, I didn't know that till we got into it, but so I come up, took her to lunch, and it was great, and then made a date to meet her the next morning for church, not to come pick her up, but to meet her at church. And so Sunday morning she called me, and said, I've been crying all morning. Said, you don't want to come see me? I can't get. I said, it don't matter, whatever. And anyway, she told me, she said, I want you to come to my house, but I don't want you to drive here. I want you to drive just down the street. There's a little Baptist church down there. Park in that parking lot and get in my car and let me drive you up here. I thought, that sounds strange. Okay. So we made that date, and here I come. And I get out of my car and in her car, and we drive a quarter of a mile and turn into this driveway right here and come up the driveway. When I come across the bridge down here, I felt peace like I hadn't felt in years. Peaceful. Awesome. And she drove very slowly up here, and instead of going over to where she lived, her house, she pulled over here. This is where her mother was, in this house, and they had a friend of theirs staying here renting it at the time, and it was a good friend of Jean, my wife. But when she pulled up and I got out of the car, I walked right past the conversation out onto the deck of this house. And I stood on that deck and saw how possibly 10 times bigger was real. Now, I'm a very weak puppy compared to what it takes to do something like we're talking about at that time. And but we stood there, and I stood out there on that porch longer. I didn't even think about it, but Jean told me later, you stood there a long time. And but I was just soaking in God. So we got back in the car and drove over to our house now. And I tease her about this all the time. When I got out of the car, I mean, it was just what I had talked to God about coming up from Florida, find a cabin up in the mountains. This house is like a tree house. It is absolutely beautiful, and it was the most peaceful. But here's the story. There was zero doubt, none, that all of this was purposed by God. And what does that do for anything you're going to do if you know God put it together? Good grief. It eliminates a lot of things and makes a lot of other things positive. But here, 2 weeks later, we decided we was going to get married on this property, and it was during COVID. So it wasn't easy. But we started walking the property and praying for animals to come. And because in reality, Jean had been gone from here 20-something years. She had a renter in her house and just had moved back in. So a lot of things developed to say that's where you need to be to build the M.A.S.H army. I knew that we had a job to do. And it is so awesome when God said, won't you go to work for me? And all them years later, here we sat with an answer. Here's where it's at. Now get busy. Get busy. Build that army. And build 160,000 born-again people. Recruit them into this army. I could talk all afternoon about what it is here that we're doing. The veteran cemetery here is just unbelievable. And we are building a hero wall. And we're asking, if you've got a hero, let's put them on this wall so that they're going to be known and video why they're your hero and put that on our webpage. So we're working that right now. And if you've got a hero, and she'll show you a picture of the hero wall. But come and do it. But come and get involved. And then out there, right now, wherever you are, if you've got a church that needs to grow and you don't know how, get in touch with us and become part of the M.A.S.H Army. This is what God has planned for us to do, and we're trying to find everything we can to get it done. So let's talk about it.